think through years of marriage, it does happen. Like someone's faster or someone's slower. But again, always coming back to the idea that we need to be a team, and if we don't communicate, if we don't try to find a win-win between the two of us, how else can we face other challenges together?
Hello and welcome to the Connect to Marriage podcast. I am Delia and I'm your host for this episode. In each episode of the Connect to podcast, we'll be tackling questions that couples ask about marriage, communication, conflict, and so much more. We hope you will keep tuning in to learn with us as you grow closer, deeper, and stronger in your marriage. Conflict is a natural part of any relationship, but learning to navigate it in a healthy way can make all the difference in a marriage. In today's episode, we'll explore the skills that couples can develop to handle disagreements constructively. I'm excited to welcome Ed and Rheyza, our guest couple for this episode. Welcome to the Connect to podcast, Ed and Rheyza. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Delia.
Hi, Delia.
Could you tell us more about yourselves? What do you do for work and how long have you been married and what do you enjoy doing together?
Okay, hi. So I'm Rheyza. I'm a special needs teacher. We've been married for 7 wonderful years, and there's definitely been a lot of times where we've had conflict, which we actually call as heated agreements. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Edward, and I'm currently in project management. And we've been, like she said, we've been married for 7 years. And what do we enjoy doing together?
Well, we like going to coffee places.
We enjoy spending time with our dog. Oh, and we recently picked up a hobby. Not so recent, but it's only been a year, where we play this game called D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. So we host it quite regularly at our place, and that's been really fun. Yeah. It's something I would encourage everyone to try at least once. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you actually host like game parties at your
Yes,
home.
as in we are just the hosts, like physically, but we're not the game masters. Yeah, we are participants.
We're participants, yeah.
Okay. Nice. Thanks for introducing yourself to us. And you shared about heated arguments.
Agreements.
We call it heated agreements.
Oh wow, that's a wonderful reframe. Tell us more about how you came to this reframe about heated agreements.
We heard it on like some show on TV.
Yes.
And that's why we picked it up. And we really feel that it encapsulates a lot of what we go through so often.
Yeah, I think we always end up like talking a lot and like being very passionate in our conversation. And we're like, wait, we are actually talking about the same thing. And like, we kind of don't like, we're agreeing about the same thing,
Yeah.
Like, I don't call it heated agreements.
So I guess passionate is a nice way of saying really upset and angry. Yeah. So we have our points that we want to get across, and things can get really heated. But after a while, when there's like this moment of clarity, we realize, oh dear God, we're actually talking about the same thing. And we are trying to drive home the same point, but in our own ways and with a lot of our egos like coming across first.
Oh, that's actually very insightful, because I think that also sounds a lot like some like marriage experts will refer to as fighting well in marriage. And to a certain extent, it's okay to have what may seem to be disagreement at the get-go, but then after that, realizing that what the both of you intended for each other or for the marriage was actually shared. It's a shared goal, and it was something that was meant to be for good, right?
Yeah.
So could you maybe share with us an example of what a heated agreement might look like in your marriage?
We're quite different in some ways, okay? One way that we're different is kind of how we manage our time. For me, I'm quite a workaholic. I'm like an energizer bunny at work. And being a teacher, work is not just that working hours. We also work after the hours. And I think that's how I deal with it. But Ed's more balanced. Like, he knows how to like enjoy and then work and then enjoy. We do have like conversations about how we manage our time. And sometimes we're like, but we discussed this or we planned this already. And then we'll have a lot of like, no, we discussed this all the time already. And then after a while, like, wait. We were talking about the same point about us just wanting to be relaxing at home. We didn't have to fight about how to manage our time for chores or who needs to wake up first, walking the dog or feeding the dog. At the end of the day, actually, it's the same point about just balancing our time to be with each other.
She's right. And something did come to mind. So there was this trip that we had early on in our marriage, right? We planned this overseas trip to the Philippines, and we were going to meet some of her family members over there. So for me, I'm the kind that likes to travel and be in the moment and enjoy the experience and enjoy the people. And I don't like fixed itineraries. I really cannot stand guided tours and all that. Like, that's so totally not my thing. But what I realized is that my wonderful wife had not only planned out like the aspects of the trips right down to like certain hours of each day, she had come up with a color-coded Excel sheet for the holiday. Excel sheet. Then she printed it out. Not enough. Printed it out and then passed it to me and then put it in our folder with all our travel documents. And I'm just like, what on earth is this, right? Madness. We are two very different people and two very different styles, but we realized that we both wanted the same thing. We wanted to enjoy the trip. And for me, to enjoy the trip means not having all these constraints as I see it. But for her, having it all planned out, having it all neatly laid out in her mind is very important in order for her to enjoy the trip. So ultimately, we both just wanted to enjoy it. And after that initial shock wore off, I think I realized that actually this doesn't impede my enjoyment in any way. It just helps her with hers. And it doesn't matter if she wants me to like follow a certain guide. I mean, I can always reason with her and say that, hey, maybe we don't do this today, we do something else, that kind of thing. Like, that was always open. It's just that for me, it just seemed a bit much to see a whole layout of day one to day whenever, right? And I'm just like, this is too much for me. But actually, it's not so bad. And then I realized that, coming back to the same point, it's just our own different ways of getting to the same place.
And you wonder who's the project manager here.
Completely
that's
different,
true.
right? Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean...
No, but it's so true. It's so often that I keep telling her that
That's true, huh?
I think we should swap jobs every now and then. Like, I would love to do all the interactive work that she does, and she would love to do all the administrative work that I do.
Something that you mentioned also came to mind, which is a regular conflict in the house. Because you mentioned about impeding what we want, like the big picture in the end. One very common conflict in the household is chores, weekend chores. I'm the kind who wake up on a bright Saturday morning so that I can do all the chores and get it done and over with. So I'm the kind who do first and then rest, right? My dear husband is the kind who like to rest first so that he has enough energy to do work. And I think what happens is he'll sleep in for the Saturday morning. And by the time he wakes up, I'm so resentful because I'm like, you're only waking up now. I'm done with everything. I don't need you anymore, but firstly,
it's the weekend. It's a weekend for a reason.
Yeah, firstly, it's the weekend. And secondly, it's about, again, going back to the idea of time and the concept of time. At the end of the day, actually, what we wanted is to both rest and have a clean house to go back to. So we have since learned to plan out, like, what time do we plan to wake up? Which chores do we want to do on Saturday versus on Sunday? And the idea that we both don't actually want to have a weekend where we fight and kind of resent each other. Actually, the idea that we just want to rest and be calm and peaceful for 2 days is more important than having a clean, perfect, pristine house.
It's taken us this many years, and it's still a work in progress, where we are getting into a flow of things where we understand that she's much more of a morning person and I'm much more of a late night and evening person.
And I'm more task-oriented, but he's more big picture.
Yeah. So what she does is that she has this burst of energy in the morning, right? Then it starts to wane towards the end of the day. So for me, I just pick up. Like, mine is an incline graph all the way to the end of the night. And so what happens is that we both sustain each other in different ways. So when she starts dipping in the afternoon, I'm like, oh, you know what? I'll do this. I'll go here. I'll go get this. And then like towards the end of the evening when she's like ready for bed, and I'm just like, let's get some popcorn, like just still chill and do stuff. So I guess we just are learning that we actually just balance each other out. It's not so much of a problem than it is a way to complement each other. Yeah.
That's refreshing. And I really appreciate how Rheyza was really candid to say that in the early days when you saw that you were trying to finish up the chores while husband is sleeping, it brought some feelings of resentment. Walk us through about how you have figured it out to where this point is where you realize it's complementary rather than the differences are so jarring. What kind of communication techniques worked for you? How do you learn to hear each other out beyond the behaviors?
The early years of marriage are filled with unique challenges and opportunities for growth. What happens after saying I do? At the Connect to Just Married workshop, you will gain practical tools to work through differences and conflicts and learn ways to keep the romance alive. If you have been married for 5 years or less, This workshop is for you. Get more information at www.family.org.sg/C2JustMarried.
Let's start with me. Personally, I really, I want to say the word hate, but I seriously resent it when somebody generalizes and puts me in a box or stereotypes. It really gets to me. It's one of my pet peeves. So I have learned enough about how it makes me feel to not practice it in my own life and on someone else, in that sense. So that's something that I do. I try my level best not to generalize when it comes to Rheyza. So when she does something or she says something, I really hold back and refrain from saying things like, oh, there you go again, or you always say that, or it's the same thing from you again. Something along those lines. You get what I mean?
But and I think you will also point it out to me.
Yeah,
when
so
I do that.
And I get really triggered when she does that to me. So I will quickly point it out to her. I say, don't do that. You're generalizing again. What do you mean by always? And then I'll stop the conversation, right? And I'll ask her to clarify. What do you mean by always? What do you mean by again? That kind of a thing. So that's something I do. I try really hard to be mindful and not generalize when I'm angry or just upset or having an argument or trying to clarify something that's not very pleasant.
And Rheyza, from the point of view of listening to what Ed has just shared, right? When he asks clarifying questions like, what do you mean by this? Would you perceive it as antagonistic versus actually just seeking to understand? What makes a difference, right? Because when it's phrased this way, from the recipient's point of view,
I think being a special needs teacher, it also helps me always coming from the idea of seeking to understand, trying to understand where the person is coming from, what perspective he has. And actually through the years, we have also kind of reminded each other in the idea that when he asks me a question, he's not against me. It's not an attacking question. It's a clarifying question and really trying to go beneath the surface in our discussion. And that the idea that we are a team, it's not that he's asking to attack me. It's more to ask me to clarify, and so that we can both understand where each other is coming from. And from there, he's been very consistent in this. So with that consistency, I also learned that we're here to support each other and we're a team rather than two different individuals fighting against each other.
If I may add, I think you brought up a very good point about whether it's antagonistic or not. Because as much as I like for it to be a fact-finding endeavor and I truly just want to end this on a good note, this argument or whatever we're going through, truth be told, sometimes it's there as a point to catch her on her word. You get what I mean, right? So it's more of like, I'm saying it out, like, what do you mean by that? It's just basically for me to have some breathing space for her to know that, oh, she messed up, and then at this point, I'm just like, okay, I just got to put it out there. And maybe the intention is not entirely altruistic or whatever you want to call it, but its roots are definitely from a place of goodness and wanting to heal and wanting
to do better,
to have a good end to this argument and to do better. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that actually comes from learning how to trust each other, right? Because, for Rheyza to actually reflect and say that, hey, but I know that when he asked this question, it wasn't really so much to point out my faults, right? But it's actually he's seeking to understand me. Yeah. And how about from your point of view, Rheyza, have there been moments where you felt that, you're hoping to raise your concerns to Ed, and it was more of you raising it as a concern from your point of view?
Earlier on in the relationship, I think I tend to be more on the quiet and reserved side. I think if I have a problem, I don't like confrontation. And it takes a lot out of me to reflect on things over a few days, and then I'll go over to him like, no, sometimes sobbing, because it takes a lot of my emotion to go like, Ed, I actually want to talk to you about something. And then I always take it as that maybe I'm doing something wrong, or maybe my expectations is different. But through the years and through a lot of discussions with Ed, he likes to communicate and discuss things. So really building that trust and openness to bring up my thoughts and points, I think, across. Sometimes with my pointers and task list on my phone, because that's the kind of person I am. And trusting that, hey, if I bring this up, it's not to attack you or to attack him, but more of these things are bothering me, and if we don't bring this up, we are not going to grow together, and it might even drive us apart, because at some point, my expectations might be different, or my priorities might be different from him. I think through years of marriage, it does happen. Like someone's faster or someone's slower. But again, always coming back to the idea that we need to be a team, and if we don't communicate, if we don't try to find a win-win between the two of us, how else can we face other challenges together?
And I think when you shared, Rheyza, that you are someone who's a little bit more cautious towards, confrontation. Can you speak to our listeners? Because some of them might be facing that. They might be struggling, and it really takes a lot out of them, to bring up something. Speak to them in terms of what might be some common struggles that they're facing internally, and how would you encourage that person to try and take a step forward?
I think when you really want to bring some things up, some of your first self-talk might be about, oh, maybe it's me. Maybe it's my fault. Or maybe I should do something better. It's not his fault. But if you don't bring it up, either you'll grow some form of resentment in yourself, or the other person might not know where you're coming from or why you're suddenly acting in a different way. And if you are not clear on that, or if you don't speak up, it's also very difficult for the person to keep guessing on what you might be feeling and what your thoughts are. And if you don't share what you're going through, the other person will have no information to work on and to improve on. So you do have to take that courage, because if you don't take that courage, you're just going to remain stagnant. Every time you try to overcome a challenge, I think that's where you grow. And that's where healthy conflict comes about and heated agreements. If you don't do this, your relationship is not going to grow and grow stronger.
If I may add to that, coming from the point of view of the other half of this story, where I was constantly faced with someone who did not really want to share, and I felt an extreme importance for communication and sharing in any kind of relationship, especially one that involves like ours, right? Marriage and romance. So the way I saw it was that I don't like to leave things as they are without proper closure, because it's like a wound, if it continues to fester, it's just going to get worse, and it's not going to be good for either of us. And so that's why I firmly believe in communicating and trying to sort things out as much as we can and as soon as we can. But apart from that, I think the work that the other person has to do is something that would involve creating that safety, that space, and being consistent. It's time and time again, you prove to them that they are safe. It's okay for them to be honest. It's okay for them to be raw and unfiltered, and that the judgments, though they may be there, will not be harsh, number one, or if you can really work towards it, there will be no judgment. Honestly, this is a ideal about no judgment, but sometimes it's going to be there. And lastly, it's about that creating of safe space, right? It's essentially about that holding that space. So once you create it, you got to hold it for each other. And now it has become a team effort where we have to really remember and remind ourselves to hold that space. And if it's broken, that sanctity is broken, we work on rebuilding it again and then hold it again.
That's so powerful. Thanks so much for that. And I think that really leads us to the question that one of our listeners has raised. It says, my spouse and I often feel overwhelmed by the pressures of work, children, and the daily tasks that come from running a family. When we finally sit down to relax at the end of a week, even a small disagreement can quickly spiral. I find myself saying things I regret, and in those moments, it's hard to stop and calm down. How can I genuinely repair things and apologize when I've hurt my wife, especially when I'm feeling ashamed of myself? It's a question from my husband, so I'm not sure if Ed might have a word of encouragement for him.
So I think the fact that there's guilt, there's that remorse, tells me that there's truth in there. There's truth in that statement. There's truth in that wanting to seek reparation, and to me, I think that's important. That's a very good first step, that recognition of guilt, or that recognition that there is something that needs to be worked on. And that's already a huge win. Starting there is a great place to start. Personally, that's how I feel. What I have come to understand is a very important thing, which is understanding your spouse or your partner's love language. So if you want to seek reparation and seek forgiveness, I think it's very, very important to speak their language, to understand what they would appreciate, meet them where they're at. And sometimes that would mean something like, okay, I know she's angry. She needs her time out, so I'm just going to leave her to it. I'm just going to go out for my soccer game, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to see how things are, right? But maybe, and this is something I've tried, where leaving her alone, yes, that might be what she needs, but also for her to witness me packing my stuff and going out to have fun with my friends while she's really, really like seething in one corner of the house, right? It's not exactly helpful at all, right? So for me, to make that effort to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to cancel this activity that I have or this outing that I have. Not because I'm like punishing myself for what I did wrong. No, it's because I realized that for her love language, one of it is quality time. So that means just being there with her, maybe not just talking, but just being in the same space as her. And she will also know that, oh, I'm sacrificing something just to be there with her and to be ready and open to her whenever she wants to communicate or whenever she wants to connect again, right? And making that step to say, I'll cancel that because I think you're more important to me right now, you know, and letting her know that by that action speaks volumes. So it comes back to, yes, number one, pat on your back for realizing that there is an issue and that you really want to do something about it. And number two, I think it's about love language and meeting them where they're at.
Yeah. I think as much as we've been talking about seeking to understand, we also need to be talked to in a language that we can understand. We can't always be, what does the other person mean? But the other person also needs to come to the middle ground and find ways to express such that the other person will understand it.
Well, that's really encouraging because, and thanks for sharing from personal experience. I believe that was being in that space together, even though not ready to talk yet, actually makes a whole lot of difference, right? And giving each other time to calm down after a heated agreement is needed, but thereafter seeking restoration includes learning how to set aside our need to actually defend ourselves or to actually, quickly try and like justify certain actions or words, but just to acknowledge and say, hey, something went wrong over there. Can we start all over again? Or can we talk about it? So thank you for sharing that. I've been encouraged by your reflections, Ed and Rheyza. You have shared so much from your personal life, and I believe from your personal experiences of reframing conflicts into healthy agreements, it is evident that both of you are playing a team together and also learning how to hold space for one another. So before you go, do you have any last words of advice for our listeners?
For me, if we could leave you with one piece of advice, it would be to remember that you and your partner are on the same team. Do approach conflict with the spirit of collaboration and the willingness to understand each other's perspective. I think that's really important for you to grow together.
Seek first to understand and then seek to respond. But when you do so, respond kindly. I think kindness is underrated. Like, people do not understand how important it is, even in familiar relationships. Sometimes we forget to be kind to ourselves and to each other. But apart from that, I think it's also about the little things. We may look at marriage and relationships as a huge, complicated thing. Yes, it is sometimes, but it's also made up of many little things coming together. So for me, it's very important that I also am consistent in the small things. Like, if I was to put things into the fridge, for example, I'll put all my things at the back and I'll put hers in front. So it's easier for her to see her things and take her things first. And then like every morning, even though she leaves for work, because teacher, right? She leaves for work earlier than me, I will still make sure I get up in time to just send her out the door. And then I'll go and get ready. It's like every day, even though I can sleep in for the extra 15 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever, right? It's not as important as saying bye and sending her off. And on that note, the last point is, I never hang up the phone without saying goodbye. It's these little things, don't just like end the call. It matters. After a while, you realize that it really matters.
Sometimes it's just a sense of humor. Ed is really funny. So sometimes it just takes some jokes to diffuse some heated conversation too.
Yeah, learn to laugh at yourselves. Yeah. I really think that's also another underrated thing. Learn to laugh at yourselves and at each other. It's okay. It's okay to laugh at each other sometimes. It's really, really important. Yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. So in each podcast, we end off with a couple challenge for couples to do and share with one another. And if you are listening to this with your spouse, here's your challenge for this week. Think of a time when a small disagreement escalated and each of you share how you could have handled it differently. Then make a commitment together to practice one specific tool. For example, taking a pause, using I statements, active listening, or perhaps even doing a gesture that expresses the other person's love language during your next disagreement. So that's all we have for now, and we hope you found today's episode helpful and encouraging. Do share this podcast with a friend who might also benefit from it. For more marriage resources, check out our latest articles at www.family.org.sg. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to take care of yourself and your spouse.